Have you ever looked around and wondered, if nothing's wrong, why does everything still feel off? Your room is quiet, your schedule is clear, but your mind won't stop spinning. You try to make good choices, but a single comment, a wave of frustration, or an invisible pressure suddenly derails your focus. It's not that you're weak, it's that the world is noisy, and somewhere along the way, no one taught us how to think through the noise. We were handed facts, degrees, opinions, but not clarity. Not strength of thought. Not the kind of quiet sharpness that doesn't just react, but responds with depth. The Stoics understood this. They didn't aim to outthink others, they trained themselves to outthink their own confusion. Their minds were weapons, not because they knew more, but because they needed less to see clearly. In this video, I'll walk you through 15 Stoic lessons, not as commandments, but as reminders. Simple ideas that help you cut through the fog, stay composed when others crumble, and make choices that reflect your best self. If you've ever felt lost in your own mind, this might be the clarity you've been needing. Let's begin. 1. Being smart means more. Have you ever met someone who seemed brilliant on paper, fluent in theory, sharp in speech, yet somehow their life was a mess? They knew the right things to say, but never knew when to say them. They were quick with facts, but slow to apologize. That's when it hits you. Intelligence in its popular form is often just noise without rhythm. We've been told being smart is about scoring well, memorizing fast, responding sharply. But true intelligence isn't measured in speed. It's measured in clarity, in restraint, in presence. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Wisdom, then, isn't knowing what's right. It's living it, especially when it's hardest. Stoicism teaches that knowing is never the destination. Action is. If your knowledge doesn't translate into calm under pressure, courage in fear, or kindness in power, then it's hollow. You may impress others, but you'll never lead yourself. I once met a mechanic, no college degree, no formal training in philosophy, but the way he carried himself, the patience in his hands, the way he taught his son to work quietly with care, you could tell. He understood life better than most men in suits. That's what wisdom looks like. Not loud, not showy, but deeply rooted. You feel it in a person's steadiness, not their speech. So ask yourself, when was the last time you paused before reacting? When was the last time you noticed the storm inside you and chose not to let it guide your hands? That is the training. That is what separates knowledge from wisdom. A sharp mind is not about accumulation, it's about precision, and clarity only comes when you clear out the ego, the noise, the constant urge to win. So if you want to live smarter, start by living quieter. Don't rush to speak just to prove you're right. Observe, reflect, align. Because once you begin to respect thought as a tool for right living, not performance, you begin to think clearly for the first time. And that leads us to our next lesson, one that takes the same sharpness inward. Let's go there. 2. Stay endlessly curious. When was the last time you asked a question, not to impress, not to win an argument, but simply because you wanted to understand? Not what should I eat today, but something that shook your foundations. Why do I believe what I believe? Am I truly awake, or just drifting through habit? These aren't questions for the dinner table, they're questions for the soul. And the truth is, the moment we stop asking them, something within us quietly begins to fade. Epictetus warned, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." That's the danger. Not ignorance, but the illusion of certainty. In Stoicism, curiosity isn't a passing amusement. It's a form of courage. It means daring to examine what you've accepted without proof, to hold your thoughts up to the light and ask, is this mine, or was it given to me by fear, by pride, by someone else's voice? I once met a quiet old man who kept a weathered notebook in his coat pocket. It was filled not with plans or achievements, but questions. What does my anger protect? What do I avoid that keeps returning? He didn't chase answers like trophies. He sat with them, lived with them, and when I asked him why, he said, because the question always arrives before the truth. That's the kind of mind we need. Not one that recites facts, but one that lives inside questions. Because questions are mirrors. They reveal what we've hidden from ourselves. They strip away arrogance, force us into humility, and plant the seeds of transformation. So write your own, even one. Let it follow you. Ask it again when you're tired, when you're angry, when you're still, because the most intelligent people I've known aren't those who knew the most. They were the ones who never stopped wondering. And from that wondering comes something greater than knowledge. It's the ability to doubt with wisdom, to live in the tension between clarity and uncertainty. Let's walk forward now, not just with curiosity, but with the will to test what we find. 3. Prove before you believe. Have you ever paused and realized some of the deepest beliefs you hold might not even be yours? They came from your parents, your teachers, the culture around you. They weren't chosen, they were inherited, and yet they guide your choices, shape your fears, limit your potential like invisible hands steering your life. That's the danger of belief without inquiry. You spend years walking in circles inside a room, never questioning if the door was open the whole time. Stoicism doesn't ask you to reject everything. It simply demands that you examine everything. Epictetus once said, "Don't just say you've read books. Show that through them you've learned to think differently." To be Stoic is to stand before every belief and ask, is this true or just familiar? Is this mine or something I was told to carry? If it passes the test of reflection, you keep it. If not, you let it fall, not with drama, but with grace. I once met a woman who believed she wasn't creative. She'd heard it her whole life, too practical, too logical. But one day she asked, what if that's just something I was told, not something that's true? She began drawing every night, quietly, and within a year she sold her first painting. Not because she found talent, but because she stopped believing a lie. So many of us stay small, not because of who we are, but because of what we've never questioned. College is the only path to success. Marriage equals happiness. You shouldn't want more. These aren't rules. They're walls until you push on them and realize they're made of paper. If you want to live smarter, don't worship belief. Test it. Write down 3 things you assume are true about yourself or life. Then act just once as if they weren't. Let that contradiction breathe. You'll learn more from that discomfort than from a dozen affirmations. Truth isn't fragile, it survives pressure, and if something falls apart under the weight of your honest questioning, it was never truth, it was convenience. Let that be your new habit. Question everything, even yourself. And now, let's go deeper, because real wisdom isn't just in the mind, it lives in the senses. 4. Engage all your senses. When was the last time you truly felt what you were learning, not just understood it with your head, but absorbed it with your whole being? Maybe it wasn't a textbook or lecture that changed you, but a quiet scene in real life, a phrase overheard, a moment observed, something that reached you through the senses before it ever touched your thoughts. That's how real wisdom enters, not by force, but by presence. Stoicism was never meant to be sterile or theoretical. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire yet still took time to note the color of dawn or the shape of human behavior, reminds us that perception is everything. The Stoic doesn't just live in thought, they live through experience. The more clearly you see, the more truly you understand. Wisdom is not detached from the senses, it's sharpened by them. What the body forgets, the mind cannot hold. I once knew a retired craftsman who could barely read, but had an uncanny ability to grasp complexity. Ask him how something worked, and he'd build you a model from scrap wood. "I see with my hands," he'd say. He wasn't trained, he was alive to what his senses revealed. And in his own way, he was a philosopher, grounded in the world, engaged fully with it. Try this. Instead of just reading a new concept, draw it out. Speak it aloud. Touch something that relates to it. When you walk outside, don't just walk, look. Smell the shift in season. Feel the wind as information, not background. Listen not just to words, but to tone, to pauses, to what isn't said. The Stoic mind doesn't detach from the physical, it sees the divine in it. You don't need to become an artist to see like one. Just reclaim your attention. Every sense is a doorway to deeper understanding, and when the world begins to blur again, as it always does, you'll need something more than logic. You'll need intuition, the art of trusting what your senses have gathered. And that's where we head next. 5. Action under uncertainty. Have you ever stood on the edge of a decision, heart beating faster, mind filled with what-ifs, and still done nothing? That moment, right before clicking enroll, speaking up, or saying yes to a life you secretly want. It's not always fear that stops us. Sometimes it's the quiet grip of uncertainty, disguised as delay, wrapped in logic. We wait for clarity, for confidence, for permission. But life doesn't hand those things out in advance. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Stoicism was never about waiting until things made sense. It was about moving forward, even when they didn't. The Stoic doesn't act because the path is lit. They act because standing still costs more. In a world addicted to guarantees, discipline is learning to choose without them. I remember the shift in my own life came quietly. I was doing everything right. Practical degree, safe job, respectable goals, but I felt hollow, like I was living someone else's map. One night, I asked myself, what if this version of success isn't mine? That question cracked something open. I began trying things that didn't make sense. Creative projects, late-night writing, conversations where I finally said, I don't know. None of it felt safe. But for the first time, I felt alive. The truth is, we don't fear failure. We fear being seen unsure. We avoid the unfamiliar because we've been taught that uncertainty is weakness. But the Stoic sees it differently. Uncertainty is the raw material of growth. Each time you act in its presence, you carve a new groove of strength in your mind. So ask yourself, what's one thing you keep postponing, not because you're unready, but because you're uncertain? Start there. Take the first step. Not because you're fearless, but because you're choosing to lead your own life. And as you do, your mind will begin to shift, not by force, but by harmony. That's our next step. How to think with the full force of your brain, aligned and awake. Let's keep going. 6. Think with your whole brain. Have you ever felt like your thoughts were sharp, but your creativity was missing, or that you could imagine freely, yet couldn't organize your ideas into action? That feeling isn't failure, it's fragmentation. Somewhere along the way, we were taught to divide ourselves, to be either analytical or artistic, logical or emotional. But real wisdom lives in the union, not the separation. The Stoics didn't care if you could quote philosophy. They cared if you lived it with clarity, with integrity, and with depth. Marcus Aurelius didn't just think, he felt, observed, questioned, wrote, and ruled with both rigor and reflection. That's the secret of whole brain thinking. It's not about being balanced in some soft, symmetrical way. It's about being integrated, letting reason and imagination collaborate, letting intuition guide analysis, letting feeling shape judgment. Leonardo da Vinci was the embodiment of this. He sketched mechanical devices with the curiosity of a scientist and the hands of a painter. When he imagined a flying machine, he didn't begin with equations. He watched birds. He saw the world not in parts, but in patterns. Einstein, too, didn't start with math. He started with wonder. A boy on a train, dreaming about chasing light, and that dream cracked open a new universe. You don't need to be a genius to think this way. You just need to stop cutting your mind in half. Next time you plan something, draw it instead of listing it. When you learn, speak it aloud, connect it to a memory, turn it into an image. Let your mind play. And when you're stuck, don't push harder. Move, walk, hum a melody. Let your thoughts rearrange themselves in the background. That's how new ideas sneak in, not when you force them, but when you make space for them. Whole brain thinking isn't a trick. It's returning to how you were meant to think, fully, freely, fully alive. But none of this works if your body is drained. So let's go where it all begins, the foundation of clear thought, steady mood, and creative power, the way you fuel yourself every single day. 7. Nutrition and lifestyle. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to think clearly when your body feels off, when you're tired, bloated, or running on sugar and caffeine? It's not just discomfort, it's disconnection. Your body and mind aren't separate chambers. They're two halves of the same blade, and when one dulls, the other cannot cut through life with precision. We don't often picture the Stoics concerned with food or fitness, but they were. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that even emperors must tend to the vessel that carries the mind. Leonardo da Vinci, who lived the Stoic ideal through action and inquiry, treated his body like a sacred machine, strong, agile, precise. He didn't move to look good. He moved to think well. That's the real Stoic standard, not aesthetics, but clarity. I used to drink soda every day, eat fast food, and call it convenience. But over time, I noticed the fog, the sluggish thinking, the irritability, the emotional reactivity. So I shifted. Not into extremism, but into intention. I swapped out processed foods for greens, skipped alcohol, and respected my sleep like a ritual. Not to be perfect, but to stay sharp. Because if the mind is a sword, the body is its sheath, and a cracked sheath weakens the blade. The truth is, we chase self-mastery, but forget the soil it grows in. We meditate on stillness while neglecting hydration. We read Marcus at midnight and sleep 4 hours, wondering why we feel drained. But the Stoics would remind us, wisdom begins in how you live, not what you quote. If your daily choices poison your body, don't expect your mind to remain pure. So simplify. Eat what gives you energy, not just pleasure. Move every day, even just a walk. Sleep like it matters because it does. Tune into your breath, your heartbeat, your posture. Listen. The body is always telling the truth, even when the mind lies. And once your foundation is steady, you'll notice something profound. The chaos of life doesn't rattle you as easily, because when you live well, you begin to think in systems. And that's where we go next, into the interconnectedness of everything. 8. Connect the dots everywhere. Have you ever looked at two things that seemed completely unrelated? A childhood memory and a current frustration, a seashell and a mountain, and suddenly something clicked. A connection appeared, quiet but undeniable. That's not coincidence, that's perception awakening. And it's one of the rarest forms of intelligence. Leonardo da Vinci once saw seashells on mountaintops and proposed that land had once been under the sea. He wasn't just observing objects, he was seeing hidden links beneath the surface. The genius wasn't in knowing more facts. It was in asking deeper questions, in seeing patterns where others saw fragments. Stoicism trains us to live the same way, not to accumulate more knowledge, but to sharpen the ability to integrate. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the mind adapts and converts to its purposes the obstacle to our acting. That power, to adapt, to reframe, to connect, is what transforms difficulty into clarity. I once spoke with a barista who studied music theory. He told me he arranged his cafe like a chord, each placement intentional, each shift like a change in key. It sounded strange, but when I sat in that room, I felt it. Everything made sense, not logically, but emotionally. That's what happens when you live in connections. You create coherence in chaos. Try this. The next time you're frustrated, don't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Ask, "What else does this feel like? Where have I faced this energy before?" This is how you shift from being reactive to becoming reflective, because the real reason we repeat our mistakes isn't lack of discipline, it's lack of perception. Life keeps circling back, not to punish, but to reveal. And once you see the link, you break the loop. So train yourself to think across fields, across emotions, across moments. Let your knowledge talk to your experience. Let your pain teach your compassion. Let your curiosity reshape your reality. The more you connect, the stronger you think. And when you begin to live that way, even adversity becomes an invitation, not to crumble, but to evolve. From here, we move into something even deeper, the power of choosing your response, no matter the storm. 9. Reframe problems as training. Have you ever had one of those days where everything went wrong, your plans fell apart, someone snapped at you, the world just felt heavy, and you caught yourself thinking, "Why now? Why me?" It's natural. Our first instinct is to escape discomfort, not to lean into it. But what if that moment wasn't random? What if it was exactly what your mind needed to grow stronger? Epictetus said, "Difficulties show a person's character." He didn't say avoid them. He said, treat them like a wrestler treats resistance, with readiness. In Stoic thinking, hardship isn't punishment, it's precision. Like a forge shaping steel, life throws fire not to destroy you, but to reveal your form. And the real shift happens when you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What's this training me for?" I remember a friend who built his dream cafe from scratch, blood, sweat, vision. Then came the pandemic. Business vanished. He lost everything. But instead of crumbling, he studied the fall. He mapped his mistakes. And when he returned, he didn't just reopen a cafe, he launched a franchise model that was stronger, leaner, and more resilient. His failure didn't define him. His response did. You don't need tragedy to start this. Try something simple. Next time someone irritates you, whisper, "Patience training." When your plan falls apart, tell yourself, "Adaptability drill." These small reframes turn frustration into fuel. You become less reactive, more aware, like a mental athlete reading the terrain, not running from the hill, but leaning into it with strength. So here's a challenge. Think of 3 things that annoyed you this week. Now, reframe each as a training module. Drop them in the comments with one word: patience, focus, humility. Let your mind build this habit of reinterpretation. And if this lesson is clicking with you, subscribe, not for us, but for you, to stay connected to tools that sharpen you. Because what's coming next isn't fluff, it's fire. We're going deep into the kind of reading that doesn't just inform, but transforms, where ancient wisdom becomes modern fuel. Let's turn the page. 10. Read and research. Have you ever felt like you're growing, but deep down, you know you're just getting better at nodding along? You finish a book, save a podcast, maybe underline a powerful quote, but when asked, what changed in your life because of this? You freeze. That's the silent trap of modern learning. You're not starving for knowledge. You're overfed and undernourished. Reading without reflection is mental noise. It creates the illusion of depth while keeping you comfortably at the surface. The Stoics never read to sound wise. They read to become wise. Every sentence was a challenge. Every lesson was meant to be lived, not admired. Epictetus didn't write to soothe your ego. He wrote to burn away its illusions. His words weren't balm, they were fire. We now read the way we scroll, fast, distracted, chasing hits of motivation. But growth doesn't happen in speed, it happens in digestion. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations isn't long, yet one passage can occupy your practice for months. The real discipline is not finishing books, it's letting one idea transform your life. I remember spending 2 weeks on a single paragraph from Stillness is the Key. Every morning I sat with it in silence. I rewrote it from the opposite perspective, tested it in my relationships, failed at applying it, tried again. And by the end of those weeks, it had quietly rewired something in me. That's what learning feels like, not smooth inspiration, but honest friction. Read not to agree, but to confront. Not to finish, but to start. Choose books that pull you apart. Study them like they're cross-examining your life. Ask, what part of me wants to skip this? That's often where the medicine is. So next time you pick up a book, don't just consume it, let it consume you. The next chapter is not just a page, it's where stillness enters. Let's step into that silence together. 11. Purposeful Solitude. When was the last time you truly stopped? Not because you were tired, not because you had no choice, but because you chose stillness. Not to escape, but to meet yourself. In a world that screams urgency, the ability to pause with intention has become a forgotten power. And yet it is this quiet pause that often marks the turning point in a person's life, the moment clarity begins to speak. The Stoics understood this long before silence became a buzzword. They didn't meditate to trend. They paused to listen, to observe, to become aware of what most people rush past. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality, and in silence we see just how much of our pain is manufactured by noise we never questioned." Silence doesn't mean absence, it means presence, the kind that doesn't flinch under pressure. Imagine a moment in a crowded room, voices rising, opinions flying like arrows. One person chooses not to react. They stay still, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're watching. And when they finally speak, the room falls into quiet, not out of fear, but out of respect. That's the weight of grounded presence, and it's built in solitude. Years ago, a friend told me he couldn't bear silence. He filled every gap with music, podcasts, background shows. But what he was really avoiding wasn't boredom, it was himself. The questions he didn't want to ask, the emotions he didn't want to feel. But silence doesn't stay quiet forever. Eventually, it calls your name, and if you ignore it long enough, it will find another way to be heard. Try this. Before your next big decision, Don't ask anyone, don't search, don't distract. Just sit. Let the silence press gently against you and ask, what am I really trying to do here? The answer won't shout. It will rise slowly, and from that stillness, your next move will emerge, not rushed, not reactive, but yours. The next part of the journey demands more than insight. It asks for courage. 12. Find tough environments. When was the last time you walked into a room and felt completely out of your depth, not because you were unprepared, but because the environment itself demanded more from you? Not more effort, but more clarity, more courage, more honesty. We often mistake comfort for mastery, but comfort is just repetition dressed up as competence, and repetition without resistance creates illusions. You think you're sharp, but you've only been swimming laps in a shallow pool. The Stoics knew this. Seneca warned that we often become too proud of strengths we've never truly tested. If you've never faced the wind, how can you claim resilience? If your wisdom has never been challenged, how can you call it wisdom? Growth doesn't happen in ease, it happens in tension. And tension requires one thing: stepping into environments where you're no longer the smartest, the strongest, or the most certain. A friend of mine once joined a leadership retreat where he was the least experienced in the room. For the first 2 days, he barely spoke. But by day 3, something shifted. He stopped trying to perform and started to absorb. He asked better questions. He listened differently. He returned home sharper, not because he'd mastered something new, but because he had confronted the edge of his assumptions. If your days feel smooth, predictable, and unbothered, that's not peace, it's stagnation. Challenge doesn't always mean chaos. Sometimes it's asking a hard question in a quiet room. Sometimes it's learning a new language or letting someone point out your blind spot. The moment you stop fearing that feeling of not knowing, you begin to awaken the deeper layers of your mind. And that is what prepares you for the final step, not just surviving discomfort, but reflecting on what it turned you into. 13. Self-critique and feedback. Have you ever caught yourself running so fast through life that you forgot to ask if you're even going in the right direction? Most people never pause long enough to consider it. They're experts at decoding their jobs, their bosses, their relationships, even world politics. But when asked, do you truly understand yourself? Silence follows, and that silence is revealing. Because to truly know yourself, you have to be willing to sit in front of your own flaws without flinching. No filters, no affirmations, just you, raw and honest. That is where Stoic philosophy begins, not in the world, but in the mirror. Epictetus said it clearly: no man is free who is not master of himself. But how can you master something you won't even look at? You can't outsource this work. No coach, no friend, no algorithm will walk that maze for you. You must go in alone and meet every version of yourself, the insecure child, the egoic achiever, the avoidant adult, and ask each one, why did you act like that? It's not self-loathing, it's self-seeing. There's a difference. I once knew someone who recorded every one of his public speeches, then re-watched them with surgical detachment, not to admire his performance, but to study his pauses, his hesitations, his moments of ego. That, I realized, is real self-feedback. You don't need to do the same, but you do need a method, something that gets you outside your own skin and lets you observe from a distance. And when that truth begins to surface, don't run. Pair it with compassion. A Stoic doesn't punish their past self, they shape their present one. Because real strength is not the absence of flaws, but the courage to confront them. And once you've done that, once the noise of denial fades, you'll be ready to ask the question that only the still and self-aware can answer. If I strip away the noise, what principles remain? Let's move toward that compass next. 14. Virtue as a compass. When everything around you is loud, when choices blur, opinions collide and pressure rises, what keeps you anchored? Intelligence may help you navigate facts, but it won't tell you which direction leads to peace. In Stoicism, direction matters more than speed. And that direction has a name: virtue. Marcus Aurelius said, "If at any point you find something better than justice, truth, self-control and courage, it must be extraordinary." He never found it. These 4 virtues weren't decorative ideals, they were the compass by which he lived. Justice asks, "Am I doing what's right, even when no one notices?" Wisdom asks, "Is this in my control?" Temperance asks, "Can I say no to the things that weaken me?" Courage asks, "Will I do the hard thing, even when I'm afraid?" In moments of stress or temptation, asking these 4 questions can cut through confusion like a blade through fog. I once knew a man who turned down a job that would have doubled his salary because it required lying to clients. He told me, "It's not about money, it's about being able to sleep at night." That's virtue. It won't always bring applause, but it will bring alignment. And when you're aligned, your choices get lighter, clearer. You stop chasing. You start walking in the direction of who you were always meant to be. 15. Emotional detachment. Have you ever said something in anger and instantly regretted it? Not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't wise. That's what happens when emotion runs the show. Most people don't respond. They react, not to reality, but to a wound, an old fear, a story they never questioned. Stoicism offers a powerful alternative: emotional detachment, not coldness, not suppression, but the space to choose your response instead of being dragged by your impulse. Epictetus taught that it's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. And judgment is a choice, but only if we pause long enough to see it. Detachment begins in that pause, the moment between the sting and the snap. You don't have to shut down your emotions, you just have to stop worshipping them as truth. A woman once told me she used to cry after every argument with her partner, but one day she decided to sit with her sadness, not speak from it. She journaled, walked, let the wave pass. And when she finally spoke, her words weren't from pain, but clarity. That's what detachment makes possible. When emotion knocks, you don't have to open the door right away. Breathe, observe, then decide who's really in charge. That's not weakness, it's mastery. Quiet, calm, unshakable. If something stirred within you today, even quietly, don't ignore it. Maybe it was a truth you've buried, or a moment of clarity you've long needed. Let it stay, let it grow. Mark this turning point, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Comment below with just 2 or 3 words that capture what this meant to you. Something real, something honest. If this message gave you something to hold on to, subscribe, not as a habit, but as a promise to keep showing up for yourself. A promise to keep sharpening, questioning, growing. Because if you're still here, you're not lost. You're ready. Ready to stop drifting and start thinking with intention. To stop reacting and start choosing. And the next time we meet, we'll go even deeper. Until then, take this clarity with you. Let it shape your days quietly but powerfully. You're not falling behind. You're waking up. Keep going.